welcome to today's show. Unfortunately, today I bring you some very sad news. The game show that we all hold near and dear to our hearts, Jeopardy, has come under fire recently for one of the answers that was on their show. You see, people have pointed out that they have made a geographical error in response to one of the questions that came up, and they say Jeopardy got it wrong, and they are deeply, deeply offended at how wrong Jeopardy was, and they demand an apology, and they demand it now. So let's take a look at what exactly happened on the show and why people are so upset and so outraged over what happened. So what exactly went down on the show? Well, here's what happened. So the players choose their category, and the prompt appears, and it says, built in the 300s AD, the Church of the Nativity. So that was it. And the first player buzzes in and says, what is Palestine? Their answer is deemed incorrect, and it moves on to another player to guess. And that player guesses, what is Israel? And they are told they are correct. So the thing people are upset about here and what they're debating is whether or not Jeopardy gave the correct answer to the right person. These people that are upset are hopping online saying that the first contestant who said, what is Palestine, is actually the correct one, and they owe an apology to her, and that the contestant said, what is Israel, is wrong. So that is the main core part of the debate. So now you're all caught up. That's the situation that people are upset about. So let's now look at what the people themselves are saying about the situation in regards to why they're so upset. So our first tweet here, the man says, unacceptable. Bethlehem is in the Palestine territories, which Israel illegally occupies. Katie Needle got the correct answer and was robbed. Jeopardy owes an apology for endorsing Israel's universally condemned illegal takeover of Palestinian lands. So let's break this down. This guy uses language such as illegally occupies and universally condemned. So he's using some very strong wording there on what he believes are the facts. Well, first off, with regards to illegally occupies, Israel came into so-called control over the West Bank area, or occupation of the West Bank area, after the incident of the Six-Day War, in which they were defending themselves and fighting back the Arab nations that were going to attack, and they came into control over this territory. It is not that they were out there going, give me all this land, I'm taking it for myself, purposefully trying to gain control over a mass area. It was in response to an incoming threat. And also, he used the words universally condemned. It's not universally condemned. There are many nations who stand with Israel and are pro-Israel. So it's not that every nation in the world condemns their occupation in that area. So moving on here, let's look at another tweet that we have. This one says, we would like to express our disappointment toward Jeopardy for their blatant disregard of Palestinian sovereignty. As a game show that prides itself on facts, Jeopardy failed to state that the Church of the Nativity is located in Bethlehem, Palestine, not in Israel. Okay, so this guy is bringing up Palestinian sovereignty, which is interesting because, once again, not everyone recognizes them as a sovereign nation. There are some nations that do, but there are also some that don't. It's not a universal thing. It's a torn idea. Someone even went through the trouble of writing a letter to the game show Jeopardy to express their outrage and demand their apology. And one section in it says, the location of the Nativity Church is not an obscure or disputed fact. The show's falsification is an insult to the Palestinian people's heritage, history, and identity, as it serves to erase Palestine's deep-rooted culture and history. That is very interesting because they're claiming that Palestine has a deep-rooted culture and history in the area. Now, the concept of calling Palestine a nation or a state is a fairly new idea, And if you're trying to say that there's a deep-rooted culture and history, that doesn't go back very far for what they're claiming versus Israel's deep-rooted culture and history claim to the area. So if the argument here is between whether it's Palestine or Israel, and you're trying to use the argument for whoever has the biggest ties to the area with regards to their history and their culture and the area in general, all you have to do is look at the comparison of these two maps. So if you take a look at these, a lot of times you'll see people tweet or post the picture of the one on the right here as an example of how Israel is slowly taking over Palestinian land. However, when you look at both maps and you check out the dates on these things, there is some discrepancy. So the one that people often post is the one that goes back to the 1940s, and it shows how much land was controlled by the so-called Palestine. And over time, they make it appear as though Israel's taking over this land and stealing it from them. But once again, we're talking about the deep-rooted history and culture in the area. That's back in the 1940s. If you go back to around 1000 BC and look at a map of who controlled that land and that territory, which this is a larger chunk, mind you, including all the area in the green on the right, this area in the left in the blue includes all that and some. And that is the nation of Israel back around that time. And over time, the kingdoms were divided and people were conquered and dispersed. But if you're talking about who has a historical tie and claim to that land, and you're basing it off who has a more deep-rooted culture, you can't, and it's between the two, Palestine or Israel, you can't use in your argument that Palestine has a more of a deep-rooted culture, historical tie to the land than Israel does. And just a side note, with regards to these pictures, like I said, people like to make it look like Israel is forcing people out of this area and taking over the land, when that's not the case. And there's a long history here, a lot to look up. So essentially, over the years, they've tried to divvy up the land between these Arab nations that they're calling Palestine and the nation of Israel, and so that people can come back to their homeland. And over the years, agreements have been made and deals have tried to be worked out. But a lot of the time, you had these Arab nations that they're calling Palestine reject the deals, not wanting to share the land, and end up attacking the Jewish people. But like I said, this is a complex matter, and I want to focus on this little issue with the game show. So it's what I'm focusing on here is much smaller than the whole conflict at large. You have people that have been debating this for years and go back and forth on it, and different nations have different viewpoints. But with regards to the issue of this game show, let's focus on the wording of these tweets and the reasoning behind Jeopardy's decision. So, like I said before, there are nations that recognize Palestine as a state, and there are nations that do not. The United States is one that does not recognize them. So, this is an American television show, mainly broadcast to an American audience. Yes, people watch it elsewhere, but it's based in America, the United States. And they're going to base the questions and answers they have on that viewpoint, not on the viewpoint of another country or culture. Now, you can argue that maybe that wasn't the best question for Jeopardy to throw in due to the fact that there's a lot of controversy around the subject, and that could be true. But it also doesn't mean that they are absolutely 100% wrong, not based in facts. Because as we said, there are people on both sides that will use facts to prove very good points and very legitimate points. It's not like they're saying in these tweets that Jeopardy used no factual evidence whatsoever. There's a lot of good evidence on that side, and they don't want to even acknowledge it or look at it. So if you're trying to have a legit conversation about whether, Jeopardy was truthful or not, that's up for debate. It's not cut and dry, clear, they were in the wrong, And like I said, it might not have been the best question for them to throw in given people's torn viewpoints on it. But you can't just call them out and say they didn't adhere to facts and they didn't use any facts on the show. So calling for apologies and saying that you're outraged and demanding that they, make a public display of an apology asking for forgiveness is ridiculous. It's the same people doing this all the time. They'll get on social media and they're offended by something and they call for a public apology because they were offended. And this isn't something that necessarily warrants Jeopardy getting on and apologizing for. So everybody just sit back a second, take your chill pill, calm down, relax. And remember that Jeopardy is a game show, like I said, based in the United States, and they're going off the facts that they have, and they deem that the best answer. You can disagree with that, but that doesn't mean that they have done something terribly, horrendously wrong that requires an apology. And if it were something more clear-cut and, cut and dry, then okay, maybe. But still, we have to cool it with this hopping onto Twitter and calling for apologies for everything. They didn't do something terrible and horrific. So that is all for today's episode. Like I said, there's a lot more to that subject. I just really wanted to focus on people's reaction to what happened on Jeopardy. And I just wanted to focus on how ridiculous people's responses were to what happened on the show. If you want to get more in depth on the subject, I'm not the one to talk to on that. I can post some links to some books for you and some good material where you can get a lot more of the information. Well, thank you guys for watching. I appreciate you tuning in, and we will see you next time.